Hello and welcome to the Wild Woman Show. So here's what I'm imagining for these conversations with single and solo mums. I'm imagining that there's a new single or solo mum out there who's maybe just left her relationship or just been left, and she feels like she's got nothing much more than a phone in her hand. And so she's desperately searching for a signal that things will be all right. And I want this conversation to be a signal to her that if she trusts herself, leans in and gets curious and really just carries on, that she's on the verge of a life that she probably hasn't even dared to dream of yet. So I've invited Anna Day to speak to us today because she became a solo parent to her son when he was 8 months old. My son was 9 months old when I became a single mum. And she fled domestic violence and was faced with homelessness and caring for her son who has complex needs. With all that going on, she decided to become a charity CEO, and 12 months later, she became a CEO for the first time. So, Anna, I would absolutely love for you to take us back to the beginning of your journey and let us know what that was like and anything else you want to kind of bring in and tell us about it.
Yeah, certainly. It was lovely to be here. Thank you for having me, Claire. So I became a single parent when my son was 8 months old because my son's dad was abusive and violent. And I remember thinking at the time, I wasn't sure if I could cope, if I could be by myself and if I could do it alone, and I think I'd sort of attached myself to this ideal of a nuclear family, and I was reluctantly struggling to let go of the idea of being a nuclear family. And then I remember having a conversation with a psychologist one day who said to me, Anna, your child will be much happier if he has two parents who are together over two parents who are apart. No, two parents who are apart over two that are together that are unhappy, And for me, that was a sort of light bulb moment where I actually realized that, I needed to leave for my safety and for my sanity, and I remember the day that it all happened, and I told, and against all the best advice that people had given me, who said, do not tell them you're leaving, make sure you have money, make sure you have somewhere to go. For some reason I ignored all of that advice, and I thought, I'm such a grown-up, I will tell my partner that I'm leaving. And he threw me across the kitchen, and it was very, very scary. And we left that day with the help of the police, who escorted us away from home, and we never went back. So I made it out literally with a sort of t-shirt on. And I remember, and my son, like in this carry sort of cot, the car seats. And I remember sort of literally getting out with that and a changing bag and thinking, oh my goodness. I didn't make it out with a phone even. I didn't have a phone at the time. And I was quite financially being abused as well. So I didn't have any finances. So I left both penniless, phoneless, everything. And I remember thinking, where can the police take me that I'll be safe? And I remember turning up at somebody's house who I'd been a childhood friend with, and fortunately they said, come and sleep on our sofa. So I took my baby and we slept on sofas, and then one of them took me down to the council office. I remember said, you can apply for benefits. And I didn't even know that. I was there just thinking about work, and I need to get a job. And, I probably wasn't in my right mind at that point. And I remember going down to the council office, and they sort of put me in emergency accommodation, and we sort of arrived into this like really small, like bedsit, the bed, it just had a mattress and there was a kitchen, and there was a fridge, and that was it. There was no bed covers, there was no like anything there to make it home. And I thought, oh, I still don't have any way of getting hold of anyone. And I remember, you know, like walking down to the children's centre with my son, and it was snowing. The snow was coming down. It was like the 10th of January, so it was just blizzard conditions, and there was me in my t-shirt, you know, pushing the pushchair down to the library. And I used that opportunity then to kind of like get into my email and just email everyone, say, hey, you know, this has happened, please, you know, bring something, come visit me, you know, I've got nothing. You know, if you can bring a quilt or, you know, a kettle or a toaster, just anything, just bring it along. And I think in that moment, the sort of support started to kind of come around me, and people were amazing. People were so kind. They bought me bed covers and all the kitchen stuff, and you know, and my friends lent me the money to get a car, and they sort of really helped me get back up on my feet. I was really fortunate that I had a lovely network of friends, and even some friends from Germany. Like, they lent me money to pay my first month's nursery fees when I went back to work, you know. So people were ever so kind. But I remember in those sort of early days of being in temporary accommodation, even though it was tough in that moment, and it, you know, I still get emotional, obviously, talking about it. But what was amazing was just the weight of everything lifting off my shoulders, just arriving into that accommodation for the first time and just knowing that I felt safe. And it was just like that sheer release. And I think that for me it was just a bit like walking out of prison and not going back. You know, you're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. It feels so good to have your freedom back and to live in safety again. And you don't realize at the time when you're in it, like how difficult it is living in a domestic violence and domestic abusive relationship. But actually, when you come out of it and you realize that you are your own person again, and that you're no longer, you know, in this really dangerous situation from one day to the next, it's just this huge, it's like having a boulder taken off your shoulders. And I just remember driving along one day, somebody gave me a car as well. They were so generous, they were so kind. It was called Mr. Pod, Mr. Escape Pod.
Oh, I love it.
And Mr. Pod had things painted on his bonnet because he was my friend's like escape car to get out of London when she lived in London. She was so unhappy, she gave it to me. And when I just remember driving in the car one day, and I was listening to like Florence and the Machine, and you know, like just driving through this sort of countryside, and just noticing the beauty of it, and just laughing and laughing and laughing, and just that sense of, and then I realized, I thought, oh my God, this is the first time I felt joy since the whole thing. Like, it was like, oh, and just that release of being able to feel joy and happiness again, which is just so powerful, and really amazing. And I think that for me, it's sort of the trajectory around my life then. I was on maternity leave still, so I was on, you know, a pathetic amount of money. You know, you don't get much on maternity leave, on statutory maternity pay. And I remember thinking at the time that, you know, what can I do? I can't go back to the job that I was doing before. I can't afford to do that as a single parent. It was only, I guess, like £6,000 a year I was being paid, and it was a London job. And the cost of commuting alone was like £8,000 a year. And I remember thinking, well, what can I do? And I remember I went to the children's centre, and I had all these newspapers and job sites open, and thinking, well, how much do I need to earn to be able to survive? And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to need to earn double the amount I earn now. So, because I'm going to have to earn two people's incomes. So I was looking through all these job sites and thinking, okay, could I be a chief finance director? No, I'm crap at maths. And could I be a head of comms? No, I'm crap at grammar. And then, what can I be? And then I was stumbled across the chief executive role, and I was like, oh, well, they basically steer everything. So they don't have to be an expert of finance. They don't have to be an expert of communications, because they're just managing the people who are. So I was like, okay, I'm going to become a chief executive. And whilst I was in temporary accommodation, I applied to do a master's degree. I had no A-levels, no degree. But I was just like, I'm just going to give this a shot. I'll give it a try, see what happens. So I applied to do the master's degree, and on the basis I had 5 years of project management experience, which I may have slightly exaggerated into management experience to get into the master's. And they accepted me onto the master's program.
Fabulous.
So I think it was a time where I had to take a real kind of leap of faith into myself, but also into our life as, a mother with a 8-month-old baby. It was a really big deal, going out into the world.
Place this in my mind and in the listener's mind. So your son was 8 months, and how old is he now?
He is 17 now.
Nearly
17. Nearly 17. I keep saying 17. He's 17 in April, but he feels like he's 17 already to me.
Wow. Okay. So, and you've had these, more than a decade now of this journey. I know, like me, you're a qualified hypnotherapist, a trauma-informed coach. I mean, I did write all of these things down. You're a Global Women's Leadership Fellow.
Yes.
A School for Social Entrepreneurs Fellow, a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and Commerce. You've raised over £24 million for charities while you were in the charity sector, and led 4 charities as a CEO. And you were doing all this working part-time, rarely missing the school run, never missing a school play. And your son is autistic, and you yourself are a disabled entrepreneur.
Yes.
So, as well as neurodivergent.
Yes.
Yeah. And my goodness, let's talk about all of that. It's very inspiring. I will admit that sometimes when people became a single parent about the same time as me and have achieved skyrocketing success, I get into my feelings of inadequacy. And I'll not say it's not there with you in terms of everything that you've achieved, but we're talking about over a decade of you turning that ship so vastly around from what it was really touching to hear you talk about the beginning of your journey. Very moving, and it sounds so incredibly hard to hear that you from the very beginning had a really kind of aspirational outlook. I just think it's incredible, Anna.
Thank you.
I'm really quite blown away, because I didn't know your story. I didn't know any of the beginning of how it came about. So thank you so much for sharing so generously, what it was really like, because to all intents and purposes, that woman that I imagined at the beginning of this is actually maybe a step ahead, because you didn't even have a phone in your hand.
Yeah, it was just literally arriving with nothing. And I think for me, the kind of the journey hasn't been easy doing all of those things, so I don't want to kind of glamorize it and say it's been like a really exciting journey. It's been hard work, and I think one of the things that I've learned as I've gone through my journey has been just really about having kind of cast iron boundaries. And I remember, you know, when my son was a baby, I'd take him to board meetings with me. And he'd come to away days with me, and he'd come to church with me when I was doing a fundraising presentation and things like that. So I was always trying to close the triangle between where I lived, my work, the nursery, you know, trying to keep it as small as possible, which meant sort of moving around with my jobs, which, you know, wasn't ideal, but it just made it doable because, you know, like having big distances traveling between like nursery, home, work and stuff just wasn't ever going to work. There's been a lot of sacrifices over the years. I've had to say no to a lot of jobs. You know, I've been offered probably another 20 roles on top of the 4 that I've held, but I've said no to each of those because they involved travel I couldn't do, going to overseas to places I just couldn't work out how to make work alongside, you know, sort of being a mum to a son who's autistic. There's been, you know, roles where I've been offered the role and it's involved 24-hour call outs and I've had to turn it down at the last minute. And sometimes you just have conversations with them about flexible working and they look at you like you're an alien. And they, you know, like one role said that they were being generous, allowing me to go and pick up my son from school 2 days a week and work in the evenings to compensate. And when they said that, I said, you know, I'm not going to work for you, because if you think that's being generous, that's like a bare minimum, you know. And I'm going to be asking so much more of you, because I'm going to be asking for time off to go and, you know, take my son to appointments, medical appointments, when he's off sick, when he needs help, when, you know, things are not working well. So I just knew instantly. And I think that is something I would offer to single parents in terms of like and solo parents out there, you know, that is crucial, is that, you know, you don't have to sort of accept working conditions and flexible working that isn't really flexible working. It's, you know, them conceding a tiny amount to you. Like, they need to be generous with their flexible working policy. They need to understand that children get sick a month a year, you know, a minimum. That you know, they're going to make allowances for when you're up all night tending to a fever, you know, for your child, and that you can't kind of, and that they're not going to expect a board report, you know, on their desk at 9 o'clock in the morning, you know. And I have had to leave jobs over the years because their expectations have been too high, or their boundaries been too sort of overstepping. And I think it is really important, as you sort of find a rhythm and a way to do things, that you sort of, that if you've got a clear idea of where your boundaries are as a person, that you find something, even if it takes longer, even if it means applying for 40 jobs, not 10, you know, that you are looking for that flexibility from the outset. And even if it means turning down a lot of jobs to get there, it's worth it, because when you get an employer that understands that you are a mum to a child who does not have other parents around to take the load off, then it's so valuable, and that is somewhere you can stay and be yourself. And I think that's really, really crucial.
How did you come to be somebody with such a good, you know, because a lot of people understand boundaries or know that they kind of exist, but to live them is quite a different thing. How did you get there?
I think I started off this journey as a yes woman when I was first a single parent. I felt like I said yes to everything and everyone, and I just was going through cycles of burnout constantly, you know, sort of doing really, really well for kind of a year or a year and a half or maybe 2 years at best, you know, and then just crashing constantly and having kind of mental breakdowns. And at that time, I didn't realize I was neurodivergent. So I would typically sort of go and work somewhere for like a year or two. And then I guess I would start unmasking and, you know, as neurodivergent people do. And then they weren't really ready for the me that is unmasked. And so they, you know, inevitably it would sort of end up not ending very well. But in terms of thinking about how I developed that resilience and learning to say no, I think it started off with really starting to heal my people pleasing tendencies and codependency. I spent a lot of time like learning how to not end up in another domestic violence relationship. And you know, sort of really reading into like the codependency and trauma bonding and trying to kind of understand why I was still like attracted to and still felt love from my ex, even though he was absolute terror. And I think it was a muscle that I developed over time, you know, that it wasn't easy to say no at first, but just like when you go to the gym and you know, you train a muscle and the first time it's quite hard and it gets easier and easier as you lift more and more and go there more and more. It's a bit like that with learning to say no and practicing boundaries. It's not perfect, but if you keep trying and if you keep working at it, that you become better and better about your boundaries. And I think for me, one of the things was getting super clear on where my personal red lines were and learning to sort of tune into your intuition, you know, that sort of gut feeling in your heart and in your stomach when something doesn't feel right, and not being sort of afraid to take a step back from things when they don't feel right, even after you've said yes, that you have permission to come back and change your mind. That as an autonomous adult, you can pull back out of a commitment you've said yes to if you the next morning and you've got that sinking feeling. And I think that's something I think sometimes as a sort of neurodivergent adult in particular, it can be quite tough because emotionally we can a lot of neurodivergent people have delayed processing, so which is where perhaps you don't process the whole emotions attached to a situation for sometimes days, weeks, months, sometimes even years. And that actually for us to, you know, sometimes the decision comes along after we've been forced to make an artificial decision by a decision making process, you know, like obviously with jobs you get offered a job and you get 24 hours to decide. That doesn't fit a neurodivergent model of thinking. We can, you know, we'll often sit with something and realize we've said yes to the wrong job then a week later after we've accepted that job. And you know, despite the fact that it can feel a bit awkward having to say no later, I think the cost of saying yes sometimes outweighs the cost of saying no, and making a short-term kind of no decision is better than, you know, and upsetting them slightly is better than a yes decision that's going to really badly impact on your family life or your own life, or just doesn't feel aligned with you, and where the decision hasn't quite settled in and felt good at the end of it. And I think that tuning into your intuition makes such a massive difference. But you know, it can be a slow process. As an autistic and ADHD person, it can be quite slow.
And is that something that you coach people in your coaching business?
Yeah, so I coach a lot of parents who are running their own businesses. I coach a lot of chief executives of charities who are neurodivergent, have mental health issues as well. Tend to sort of fall into that work. And I think for me, I think what happens when you run your own business or when you're in leadership is that almost the tactics that you develop to get there, to get to running your own business, to get to, you know, running an organization, are not the same ones that will keep you surviving and thriving and throughout adulthood. And I think of it like, a lot of us, we go through school, let's say, and we are all about achievement. We try to get the best grades, we try to get the praise, the pats on the back, and you've done a great job, you know. But when you get up to running your own business or being a leader, nobody is really going to give you that external recognition anymore, and yet you push and push and push for it, trying to be recognized and valued. And unless you develop some intrinsic reward, you know, the intrinsic sense of self-satisfaction that comes with being an adult, where you can actually say, hey, I did a good job there. I did it. I don't need any of you to agree that I've done a brilliant job. I have done a brilliant job. And I think in some ways British sensibility tells us that is not being humble, it's being, you know, arrogant and things like that. But actually that is what it takes to develop an intrinsic reward system that allows us to sort of pull away from expecting others to motivate us or to provide feedback, because when we depend upon everyone else's feedback and motivation, they don't know us, they don't know you the way you know you, they don't know me the way I know me, so they cannot possibly know what's best for us. And so they might provide feedback that you might want to take into your decision making if you really care about and love them. But most of the time they cannot make a good decision for you because they do not have all the information that you have about your family life, about your personality, your strengths, your weaknesses, you know, what you're brilliant at. You know, friends and family don't really know that. They just see the small window of time they spend with you socially, you know, whether that's over a coffee or a drink or whatever. They don't know the talents of the people that they are family with or friends with. So when they're there criticizing or, you know, providing negative feedback, they don't really have the place to do that because they're not the recipients of your work. You know, they're not the people who witness the incredible work you do every day. Like, you're a hypnotherapist, Claire, you know, like no one is going to know the impact you have apart from the patient in the room, you know. And they probably won't even know it themselves for years either, because transformation is gradual, but we very often don't realize the incredible impact that people have had on us until years later, and we go, oh, that was the turning point. That was the turning point.
Some of my favorite work happens when, you know, the skill and the art of that kind of hypnotherapeutic change work is that somebody does own it for themselves. So it's almost as if I did nothing at all. You know, and
Exactly.
They go off with the internal sense that they really made this change happen for themselves. And I would say that's a really successful sort of
that's the most
outcome,
successful, you know? Yes.
Yeah.
Because it's not, and obviously I think sometimes in the moment people don't always realize the transitions they're making. You know, when I transitioned to becoming a single parent, I didn't think this is the single best thing I've ever done in my life, but it was. You know, I had no plans to become a chief executive before becoming a solo parent. I certainly had no plans to ever become a hypnotherapist or a qualified therapist, you know, and coach. You know, those things evolved out of necessity. And I think also just wanting to help others that have been through the types of things that we've been through, that actually, you know, being able to, you know, climb out of the chasm and throw a rope back. You know, I'm all about that. I think it's really important to kind of to go back and help others get out of those situations that we find ourselves in life that can be very difficult to kind of get out of by ourselves, but with a bit of guidance we can get there, can't we?
Yeah, and I often think as a single parent, quite a lot of the time, it feels like you're in that deep, dark hole and everybody's just kind of peering over the edge, going, "Oh, it looks a bit shit in there." Oh,
Oh yeah, that I so relate to
whereas
that, Claire.
you really like if you find your way out, it really is your duty to go, "Hey, by the way, there's a ladder." Do you know what I mean? And if you
There is
just
a
stretch a
ladder,
little
yeah.
bit, you'll get that first rung, and I can help you with some of the other rungs. They're a bit slippy, you know.
I love that analogy though, because it is so true. And I think it can be quite isolating being a solo parent, in practice. I think sometimes like married couples or people that are coupled around you, they sort of treat you with suspicion as if you're going to steal their husbands.
Yeah,
They,
it's a bit like it's catching, isn't it? Yeah, and I
yeah.
do remember very clearly there was a woman on the park, and I didn't know her well, but obviously well, not obviously, I lived in a small village, so news had travelled pretty quickly about what had happened to my marriage, and she said to me, "Oh, I was very sorry to hear about your marriage. That's terrible." And I said, "Oh, well, if you say so, um, you know, uh, thank you for your well wishes, but it's not feeling like the terriblest thing to me." And she said, "No, but it is. But it is." I said,
Yeah.
"Okay, if you say so, that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't
Dealing
think
with
we're really
others,
besties."
their others' reactions of you being a solo parent is, I think that's one of the harder things, especially when you're newly single, because everybody says to you, "Oh, sort of, why did you break up?" And it's like, well, then none of your business.
I know that's a deeply personal story, actually.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
I, one of the pieces of advice I often give to solo parents is that when you leave, just the same way as if I described my house, I'd have a choice. If you asked me what my house was like, I'd say, well, I live in Buckingham, and that might be enough for you to know I live in Buckingham. But then maybe you might say, well, what's it like? And I'll say it's a 3-bedroom house, and I could tell you about the state of the house, how messy or tidy it is, how much how much of a disorganized chaos it is, which it is, by the way. I am neurodivergent after all, but but I think one of the crucial things there is that we all have choice to disclose the level of comfort we feel comfortable with. So, when people ask about why did you break up with the father of your children, you can just say it was no longer working. And and when people say, well, why was that, you say it's not something I wish to talk about. So just taking that power back to not like re-traumatize yourself by having to talk about the separation constantly, which ultimately is not useful for anybody. And the people who are inquiring, they're just being nosy. And once they come up against that hard boundary, they'll just move on the topic on to another conversation. But it's just really important that we protect ourselves in those conversations, because actually for those of us who have left a relationship that's been impacted by domestic violence, each time we talk about it, we are re-traumatizing ourselves, and our physiology and our brain does not know the difference between us talking about it and us being back there. So by giving ourselves the freedom to just answer that question very briefly and move the conversation on, what we're doing is just allowing ourselves to stop traumatizing and re-traumatizing ourselves through those
Mm.
experiences.
Mm.
And that's part of taking back that power. And part of finding those boundaries again is actually being able to say, actually, that's not a topic for us to talk about today.
Mm.
And in work context especially, you can do that. You can say, hang on, I thought we were having a conversation about this.
Yes.
Let's move on,
Mm.
because I think people have a lot of curiosity and there's a lot of stigma attached to being a solo parent, but it's not something that we should have to suffer in a work environment or anywhere else. It's nobody's business but our own why we've left the relationship we did.
Mm. I think, as a coach working with people across time and it, it's just always occurred to me that everybody has something going on,
They
that you
do.
don't know about. And so our experience is that to be single or solo parents, and have a lot of other stuff go on adjacent to that. But whenever I listen to people talk about their lives, I always just think to myself, everybody's got something pretty major going on, that unless you're going to have a therapeutic conversation with them about that, or a helpful conversation, it's not necessarily that helpful to have these conversations. My son is here. Let me just to myself from I can't come away, I'm recording a podcast. What do you need? I did. I'm on a podcast, so that's fine. It's my podcast, so I can say and do what I want. You can make an appearance if you'd like.
Hello, lovely to meet you.
Oh, thanks, Ollie. That's nice.
How old are you, Ollie?
Oh, how old are you, Oz? 9. He's 9.
9. Oh, lovely to meet you, Ollie. I promise you'll have your mum back soon.
There you go. So that's reality of single parenting.
That is the reality of solo parenting. I think my son has made more appearances on my Zooms than even my dog. So, but yeah, I think over the years I haven't even apologized for it. I've stopped apologizing for it a long time ago, because
Honestly,
we're family first. We have to be parents first. I remember
it created such a dissonance in me when I was trying to fight that kind of reality, that I was living through. If ever I would try and keep the two things separate, or, just no, we can't do that, like if I'd tried to resist that situation, I probably would have ended up dealing with a meltdown,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that's so true. Yeah, I mean, I've learned that, especially, as a parent of a neurodivergent child, I just need to be ready to drop everything and anything: speaking engagements, stage engagements, being at conferences, being wherever I am. I just need to be ready to pick up, drop, go to the school, go do the school run, bring my son home, help him to regulate his nervous system. I mean, I've had long periods of homeschooling my son whilst juggling my career as well, and having to just leave calls because my son needs my emotional support in that moment. You just learn that there is no perfect plan anymore. If you let go of that idea that there's going to be a perfect plan and things are going to go to plan, then it just makes life a lot easier, doesn't it?
Much easier. Yes, I think that's actually one of the key understandings I brought through from the kind of hypnotherapy trainings that I've had, is the kind of trying to fight with what's really going on in life creates so much resistance. It uses so much energy that people don't realize they're using in just the fight with what's going on. So
and the mum guilt
oh my goodness,
that's such a good topic to talk about.
Mum guilt as a single mum, as a solo mum. I'll just as a starter for 10, Anna, I'm going to say, when I first became a single mum, I did a kind of inventory of everything that, as a kind of middle class, well-to-do mum, I had been doing, including Christmas cards and birthday parties and extracurricular activities. And I went, oh, right, yeah, that's completely unsustainable. Not energy-wise, but financially speaking, time-wise. I am one woman. And the other thing was, how tidy am I going to keep my house? How many turkey Twizzler dinners am I going to allow to be fed to my children? And I just went, actually, all bets are off. I remove all standards at this stage, and I give myself an ultimate ticket to do as many, baked bean chicken nugget dinners as need to be done for me to stay sane, because I'm going
Oh, I love it,
to
because I felt so
sanity.
much guilt at the start. You sit there, I carried a lot of guilt. I think I felt guilty when I was at work for not being at home. I felt guilty when I was at home for not doing enough work. I felt terribly guilty when my brain was off of parenting when I should be there. And I also felt guilty when I was parenting and felt like I should have my brain on the whatever the problem is in the job. And I think I I think one thing that happened for me was that I really learned to let go of a lot of that guilt, but also a lot of expectations. And actually becoming disabled actually took that to like a whole new level. I had to kind of accept in myself that actually getting any kind of meal on the table, whatever it is, when my spoons are non-existent and I've got no energy left and my whole body feels like a sack of 200 kgs of potatoes, that actually I had to just let go of that perfectionism. I had to go, right, it's enough to put food on the table. It's enough to wash up every 3 days. It is enough to clean the house once a month, because suddenly all the things that I was putting myself under pressure to do before, and maybe staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning, cleaning the house stupidly. Why did I ever do that? That actually none of it really mattered more than my health, and that now I was sort of running to a completely different rule book where, it was a choice each day. Do I cook dinner or do I wash up? I can't do both. Which one is it? Do I tidy this room or that room? Just not being able to do anything in large bursts anymore. And it, and having to learn to kind of ask for help from those around me as well, which I think you sort of develop a hyper independence when you're a single parent. And that hyper independence is a sort of a trauma response in itself, but actually, learning to kind of lean in and ask for help from others, I think is so crucial. It's a key part of survival strategy as a solo parent. It's just, you can do it all by yourself. You can do it all by yourself, but do you have to? No. So then ask for help.
That's still very pertinent for me, and a very big growth edge for me right now is, I don't have a huge support network, and I'm sort of feeling into like where I'm literally like looking around like, but who is it that I'm supposed to sort of ask for help, and what help exactly? It's kind of come to this situation where basically my kids just really want to spend time with me. So I'm like, what are the other things that I could get somebody to do for me that would make a big difference? And that's a real growth edge for me right now, because I recognize that the things I want to create in the world and do, I can't do alone, especially not if I'm also doing all of the parenting alone.
No, and that's it. I think you have to become really, really good at just asking. And what I've learned as well is that you don't necessarily, it's not always the usual suspects that come forward to help. So it's not necessarily the immediate friends or neighbors that might help you. It might be somebody that's really distant in your network, and then maybe they will come and help, and then you'll never see them again for no other reason than they just wanted to help in that moment.
Yeah, that's really lovely to hear.
I think I became a bit of a master of asking for help, because financially I had to. I was working part-time and not really earning enough money to survive, so everything became a sort of transaction of asking for help. Like, oh, my car's broken, can anybody help, on Facebook. And I had somebody drive all the way down from Birmingham to look at my car in Northamptonshire, a big sort of 2-hour drive. And I didn't know them very well. They're a good friend today. And when we ask for help, we have to remind ourselves how good it feels to be asked for help and how that creates friendships.
Thank you, Anna. I needed to hear this today.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. When you've helped somebody, how do you feel? Feels good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So when we ask for help from others, we are allowing them to feel good for a little while. And actually, when we're used to people pleasing, we're used to sending it out into the universe a lot because we enjoy that feeling of helping others. But there is an awful lot of people out there who also enjoy the feeling of helping others. So when we make direct asks out into the universe through social media, so easy these days, or through the local community Facebook page, that that support will come back to you. And during COVID, I remember we just got to the point of absolute financial poverty, because I'd been furloughed and I was ill, too ill to work, and suddenly everything was looking really tenuous. And I remember at that time literally just asking random people, can you buy me some food? And people did. People bought us food shopping round, and some people in the local community would go to the food bank for me and go and pick up the food and bring it back because I was too ill to go to the food bank. We had strangers online from Facebook, like giving us money to go and buy a week's food shop. Like we would not have survived without asking for help. And that's the thing, is it can feel awkward and difficult asking for help, but it is a survival strategy. It's more than just putting food on the table. It's an emotional survival strategy as well. As humans, we're not designed to live in one adult households. They always say it takes a community to raise a child, but actually it takes a community to keep the parent going as well. It's not just the child.
It's not really. In fact, I think most single mums I know are excellent at raising their children, and a lot of them lack the support that they need to stay well and stable while they do that. They seem to do it pretty much nonetheless, but I think it is kind of a crying shame that it has to be done like that. It doesn't have to be done like that, is the truth. I'm working with Kasia Baniak, and she talks about this asking for help in terms of as if you're inviting somebody to play a more important role in your life. And like you say, people love to step into that role of importance, I really like that frame on it, and also exactly what you said, that it feels good to help and people want to do that. And often people are just waiting for the clarity on what it is that would help.
Yeah. And I think on making friendships as well, I think, as a neurodivergent adult, I find it quite difficult to kind of make friends. It always feels a little artificial. I have a lot of, and despite that, I seem to have quite a lot of friends. But one of the things I've learned is that in order to make friends, there is a certain amount of kind of repetition and patience required. That quite often as adults, we forget that when you make a friend, when you communicate with somebody, the psychologists assessed it and they worked out that you need at least 20 strokes. That's 20 conversations back and forth before somebody classifies you emotionally as a friend. Now, quite often after 3 or 4 or 5, a lot of us are like, let's be friends, because we are sort of desperate for that connection. But actually it takes that repetition and presence with somebody to build those trusting friendships. And I think as adults, we don't get as many opportunities to spend 20 times around a stranger, before becoming a friend, because the way we socialize has changed, the way that we organize has changed. When we go and socialize, if you go to a pub or a restaurant, people don't go out that much these days, so the chances of seeing the same people is quite slim. So for a lot of single parents, the goal becomes about how can you get out and be in the same place 20 times where someone else is going to be 20 times. And honestly, the best place to do that is through organizing your own like meetups and starting to coordinate the parents in your area. And I know it becomes like another task for the solo parent to kind of take on, but over time that's what brings friendships. And I don't really know that I know that many adults with solid friendships who aren't the ones who are organizing these things, organizing just a regular coffee meetup once a week somewhere, in your local cafe where parents can come and vent. That is what gives you your 20 connections, and that is what is going to build the friendships that will last for the rest of your son's childhood and you into adulthood. And I face a new challenge now in my son being 17 and nearly 17, and he has his own social life now, and I'm finding my own need to spread my wings again and start to make friends. And there will come a time where you won't be the center of your child's universe anymore, and they will be the center of their own universe. And it's important for you to build friendships between now and then, because you will find yourself, unfortunately, quite lonely if you don't nurture those friendships over your life. So we have to think of and take care of our own needs alongside taking care of our children, because as much as we love them and want to see them go out into the world, we are also going to live with ourselves the longest. Our children will fly the nest one day, but we will be with ourselves to the day we die. And so those friendships we nurture now are going to serve us like long beyond when our children leave home, which is why it's worth investing the time, the money, and the energy in building both friendships that sort of serve the family, but also friendships that just serve you as well and serve your need to be your own adult,
Yeah.
to meet adult to adult with people.
It's interesting to hear you talk about having a network that you kind of called on when you first became a single or a solo mum. The last conversation that I had with Ava Sharelle Moore, she was talking about having moved back from Egypt and having nobody really. I think some family, but not friends. And so everybody she met was new to her, and they didn't have any limitations around who she was or what she could do, or and it was quite cool to hear her talk about that. And in a way, I think if married previous friends do back away from a single parent along that journey, it does kind of open up that freedom to meet and find people who do see you as a kind of limitless being.
Yeah,
Who's doing what she's doing, engaging in the world in the way that you are, and gonna do some cool things. I quite like
exactly.
that freedom. Yeah.
I think we have to remind ourselves that we are both parent is part of our identity. Most of us are also daughters to somebody. We may even be partners to a new partner to somebody, but we are also a friend to somebody, and we are also ourselves. And I think a lot of people experience us through multiple different lenses, but we're the only people that see that complete picture. So we may be somebody's nemesis, somebody's friend, we're all sorts of different sides of our personality to different people. The therapist, the mother, the friend. But actually, what I think is fascinating is that we when we develop our own sort of core sense of being, we allow people to meet the true sense of ourselves. And when we move away from kind of people pleasing and saying yes to everything, and we get really clear on our own identity, we allow people to meet us anew. and we allow ourselves to introduce ourselves anew to people, where the people get to see the true us, the us that's no longer sort of trying to please everyone, but has distinct tastes and interests, and loves the color yellow and likes having pink hair and doesn't want to change it for the world. That actually, when we create those opportunities to be our unique selves, then people will rise up to meet that uniqueness, and we'll start to meet more people who blend and gel with who we truly are. And that's, I think, an important journey for a lot of us, especially as women, that actually, we spend a lot of our lives trying to please other people, and not as much time thinking about how we look after ourselves and look after our own well-being and our own happiness. But actually, when we start kind of authentically living the hobbies and interests that we really truly enjoy, and not those of past partners or friends, etc., that actually, we start to meet the people who look and feel like us and who feel like home to us. And that's a really joyful thing as well, sort of coming to meeting people where you can have these, in-depth, joyful discussions with people, instead of kind of surface level. Hi, how are you? Yeah, how are you? Oh, isn't the colour of your buggy pretty? And those conversations have a place in, the early strokes of relationships, like we were talking about earlier, but they are not the foundation of deep friendship. And, for us to move into having those deep friendships, we need to just reveal who we are so others can be who they are, and there you start to develop those really deep friendships that will carry you through the struggles of single parenthood, because it is hard. I think the burden sometimes of decision making as a solo parent can be really hard.
Well, I remember the first lamp I bought as a single parent, and I just stood there like, so I don't have to please anybody else, and I can just pick the color that I like for the price that works for me today. And I stood there for about half an hour, just completely. I mean, I think, you can kind of tell what the landscape of my marriage was like, given that it took me half an hour to choose a lamp, because I suddenly didn't have to please anybody or try to, yeah, that's a bit of a telltale kind of into what it was like, because every time I came home in my marriage, something was wrong about what I had attempted to do, and yeah, it is a freedom, and it can be hard to navigate.
Yeah, it can be. And I think sometimes it's about those sort of key junctures in your child's life as well, where you're saying, okay, what school are they going to go to? How do I make this decision between all these different schools? How do I make the decision about what to do with the child that's bullying my child? Like, do I go round and shout and scream at their parents, or do I go round and talk to them politely, or and there's so many options, but sometimes just not having someone to sort of bounce those decisions off can be just weigh heavily, and I think over my son's life, I've had so many moments where decisions have felt very heavy about, what do I do next? What is the next best decision that I can make? And I think that can be really tough. And I think that's where I think kind of having friends that get you and a sort of sounding board almost, can help just relieve some of that stress. And it's not about them making the decision for you, but just having people to kind of talk to about things can just help you navigate them, and get ideas. It doesn't mean they're always right though. And I think as a solo parent, you still have to live with all the decisions you make for your child, because there's no one else to to point at. It's like, no, it's me all the way. So that can be both good and bad.
Contrasting the beginning of your journey with how things are for you now, could you kind of give us an insight into what life looks like for you now, working life, home life, parenting life?
Yeah, sure. So So I'm sort of in the next phase of the parenting journey now, with parenting a sort of older teen. And it's learning to let go a little bit now, and let him have a bit more freedom and let him kind of make more decisions for himself. And it's been a little bit tricky to kind of let go of, because you get so protective and nurturing over your children. It can be difficult sometimes to sort of make that transition to going, okay, it's your decision now. um I still work in a way that I can drop everything still to this day. As still the way I work, I still set caveats with everybody. Well, I will be there, but things might happen. um, so I try and sort of set that scene for people. And I work very flexibly now. So I run my own business. I do a lot of consulting and coaching. And by doing that, I give myself so much flexibility, both around my disabilities and around my son's health and being there for him. So there's still days where I just cancel my entire diary and go just be mum for that day, and I don't know if that will ever change because of my son's needs. But yeah, I think it, sort of life has got easier over the years. We still have our hiccups and hurdles, as any family do. I'm not going to paint it out to be perfect, because it isn't, and we have moments where we'll fall out and things like that. He is a teenager after a while. And yeah, I think for me, the important thing really has been just about working to sort of find my own life again. I'm at that stage where he's got more of his own life, and I'm trying to think about, what are my hobbies, what are my interests, what do I do with my spare time now I've got so much of it. So I think for me, there's been a sort of a transition, and I think sometimes there's a bit of a loneliness there as well, because my son has his own friends now, and I have to get used to like him spending most of his time with his friends now, and I am I'm mum in the background who's there for food and and laundry and taxis and money. but it's like embracing that next level of the journey where sort of it's preparing him for adulthood and preparing my son to go out into the world and sort of think about his own career and his own future. So it feels like a different phase of the journey. It is a little easier, you'll be relieved to hear, but still comes with its own challenges, I think. But I think for me, the sort of biggest thing about setting up a business, I mean, that was scary in itself, doing that, but especially sort of being sole learner and not being like guaranteed that I would be paid on time to pay my rent each month and that kind of thing. But actually, sort of, I think taking the decision to back myself and run the business was a really big thing, and has been the best thing I did, because it feels so much more sustainable than working for other people. And it's like the one thing you can't lose. You can sort of shrink it down and scale it back up again, depending on what life throws at you at any given time. But just having that flexibility to do that makes a massive difference. And I think, to all the parents who are listening to this podcast, I do urge you to think about self-employment and freelancing and working for yourself or running a business, because it gives you a lot more financial freedom. And I think I earn a lot more money these days, and I'm not going to pretend that it's perfect financially. We're still surviving on a single income, and I'm still working part-time, but we have enough money to pay our food and bills now, and that feels like a huge relief after the years and years of struggle. So yeah, that feels good.
Thank you. That's beautiful, because I was going to ask what advice you might have. So you've just absolutely covered that, and I would 100% second it. I've been self-employed since since my son was about a year and 9 months. So I did about a year of employment at the beginning. And honestly, I was just, that, like you said about the month of sickness a year, every moment that I had to take off sick, I would have to go in and work the hours to make it back. And I ended up with no time for myself, and everybody was sick all the time. And for most of that money was going into childcare because they were so young. So I would end up working extra hours for literally no money, and it felt like just a completely pointless exercise. Whereas self-employment for me has been that flexibility. Yes, you have to do, or you don't have to, but it's involved a lot of nervous system regulating work for me, in terms of, you don't have a guaranteed income of a certain amount to cover whatever. And you'll be surprised how resourceful you get around making it work nonetheless. I think that would probably be my thing to add, is that all of these conversations I'm having, and from everything I've seen of single and solo parents across the years, is that they're some of the most resourceful people you will come across.
Yeah, I think that is just so powerful, because for me, sort of having parents, we do so much, and we are juggling so much. And I think of it like, looking after the house as a job, a full-time job. Having a job is a full-time job. Being a mum is a full-time job. So that's already like
More
three
than,
full-time jobs, more than you have capacity for. So I always think of it like everyone has to sort of let some of that go, because nobody can sustain themselves doing 120 hours a week of work. So, it's either the house, or you let go of some of the work so that you can be a more present mum. There always has to be some sort of level of sacrifice, but I think at the same time, when you let go of that idea of perfection, that actually, that allows you to live and to breathe and to rest, because rest is so crucial for parents too.
yes, 100%. So I want to say thank you so much to you, Hannah, for such an interesting and cool conversation, which I'm sure will help a lot of people. And if you want to look up Anna's business, it's at successfulcoaching.co.uk. Or you can connect with her primarily on LinkedIn. She's Anna F. Day. And I'll drop the details of that in the show notes as well. So thank you so much, Anna, for showing up today and talking to us.
Thank you, Claire. It's been a delight, and I just hope that all the listeners out there are going to go and power forward in their solo parent journey, so they can live life and just try and enjoy it a little bit more and make the best of it.
And I genuinely think, given your story that you so generously shared with us, that even if somebody feels like they are at the absolute rock bottom in their journey, that they can listen to this and go, okay, take a breath, take a step, let's keep going.
Yes, yeah, keep going. Thank you,
Keep
Claire.
going.
Take care.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.